George Brandis. George Brandis, SC, we should make the point. I want to hear your response.
Well, George is a lawyer. He should know better. He's come to a conclusion without knowing all of the facts. I don't know all of the facts, and we'll let that wash out in the end. I'm not here to defend Belinda. She's a good local member. I don't know what happened that night. But I think she's entitled to some procedural fairness, and we'll let it wash out.
It would be sexism if it was just about bad behaviour. But I think there is a bigger issue, and that is why it continues to be an issue of public interest.
But let's not forget the Liberal Party has been involved in this process as well.
We're not going to finish with the subject. We're going to another question on the same subject from Sonia Errington. We'll come to you in a minute, sir. Hang on. We're going to a question from Sonia Errington.
Hi. As the public demands greater transparency and accountability from corporations, governments and public figures, should a three strikes you're out type of system be implemented?
OK, the question as to what you do about issues like this. Anger management is the Labor Party's policy. 3 strikes you're out. Kate Crawford.
Well, look, it's got a certain kind of appeal, doesn't it? Because you could keep them accountable. You could say, look, you're up to number 2, you better be on your best behaviour. But I also think that ultimately politicians are people too, and they are prone to making occasional nightmarish decisions. And in the case of Belinda, I think possibly some very poor judgment calls on the night. This can tend to happen. I don't want us to turn the process of democracy into a best behaviour area where everybody has to be running around and making sure they're being very politically correct and being on the best behaviour at all times. So I think we do need to scrutinise politicians' behaviour, but I'd be really wary of mandating any kind of 3 strikes policy.
Joel Fitzgibbon, let's put it this way. Would you get 1 strike for a big night out at Scores nightclub in New York if you got so drunk you couldn't actually remember seeing the lap dances?
Well, Tony, it's not me proposing the system. I'm not going to go there, but I mean, so I think suffice to say that I think our democracy works pretty well. And if Belinda Neal or any other politician had 3 of these events, I think the democratic process will have taken care of her within 3 years' time.
It's not only the democratic process, it's anger management classes as well. Is there a sort of Labor-certified anger management team that are going to be brought in? I haven't quite worked out where this is going to happen or who's going to do it. I mean, does anyone know?
Well, I suspect there's about to be.
Yeah, that's right. Charles Firth.
Well, I was a bit pissed off with Rudd coming out and sort of condemning Belinda Neal when... If you actually look at the separation of powers, like, she's a backbencher. She's actually part of the legislature, and Rudd's in charge of the executive. And I know this is all a bit technical, but actually Rudd has nothing to do with Belinda Neal. It's actually the party who should look after this sort of thing. And a 3 strikes you're out policy is I think it should be 3 strikes and you're in. Like, I don't understand why people don't like their politicians to be a bit human. I mean, what's the whole... Like, the Scores nightclub thing, it was the... You know, you saw the internal party polling, Joel. It gave him a bit of a bum.
Oh,
yeah.
No doubt.
It was the mini-sex scandal that Kevin Rudd needed to have.
And, of course, it was all set up. That's how it all happened.
Pru Goward.
Look, 3 strikes you're out in. I agree that the best test of how the electorate feels about somebody is that vote every 3 or 4 years, and that's when they make a valued assessment, and that's when they take into account human frailties, because the electorate's got a great nose for what's right and for fraud, and they've got a great nose for knowing when somebody was a bit off balance but on balance is a good person. And I think that's what they'll do in this case. OK,
let's go and see if anyone from the audience actually wants to make a comment. Yes, down the front here. We'll just wait for a moment while we get the microphone to you.
Yeah, I'm quite amazed that this hasn't come up before. The comparison between the Belinda Neal incident and the John Brogden incident. Both forms of bad behaviour, both examples where the media have really played a massive part, and this is something that really hasn't been commented on a lot. We're seeing a huge hysteria generated in the media, much larger than really what the incident probably justifies. And in the case of John Brogden, we saw someone that really was in a lot of trouble, lost their political career. What do you guys really think about the power of the media in the whole cycle of this incident?
Let me throw that first to Kate Crawford.
Well, it's a considerable power. And of course, you know, if we started giving Walkley Awards to the people who sold papers rather than journalists who wrote them, I mean, Belinda Neal would be right up there getting a gold Walkley this week. I mean, she's been on the front page of all our papers for 5 days running. I mean, that's an extraordinary amount of media scrutiny. And certainly in the case of John Brogden, that was quite a damaging experience. And in this sense, there does have to be some accountability by the media to say these are human beings, these are people's lives that are in fact under extraordinary strain. And of course, I mean, we can see how this plays out with our politicians when they are in fact becoming very upset. And I think in the case of Belinda, I mean, rightly, she's not coping with this very well right now. So I think this is an issue for the media sector to really think about and to scrutinise its own ethical practice.
Let me go to George Brandis on that. I mean, should you, as an opponent, get this in perspective? Or should you score as many big political points as you possibly can while this story is still running?
Well, for a start, I think that Belinda Neal's behaviour and what Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard have made of Belinda Neal's behaviour really speaks for itself without anybody having to score any political points. This was plainly bad behaviour. It was considered to be such by the Prime Minister, and the point I was making before is that it was something worse than that because it was an attempt to abuse power. But you know, you look at the John Brogden case, right? Now, John Brogden lost his career over that event. We will wait to see with interest what happens to Belinda Neal. I think anybody who goes into public life just has to accept the fact that what they do, what they say, their public conduct, which includes, you know, conduct at any public place, is a proper matter of scrutiny and of public judgment. And that's one of the prices people pay for having careers in public life. And I haven't heard anyone, incidentally, suggest that it is inappropriate for the media to call attention to this.
OK, I'm going to go to another question from the audience on the same subject again. It's from Linda Danielle.
Well, as part of that media coverage, Belinda Neal is reported to keep photos and names of her enemies in the freezer.
Yes.
Do you keep track of your enemies, and if so, how?
George Brandis, let's start with you.
I'm not really sure who my enemies are.
It's amazing.
You don't know any. You don't have any more. Is that what you're saying?
They're all on your own side, George.
I'm not sure that I do indeed have any enemies, but if I did, I certainly wouldn't engage in the kind of Nixonian behaviour that's been attributed to Belinda Neal. I mean, there is something, I don't know if the reports are true, these reports were sourced from within the Labor Party, which seems, particularly in New South Wales, to have this extremely gothic culture. But well, it does. I mean, there are areas of the Labor Party, particularly in New South Wales.
You're still fighting the state of origin, Queenslander.
No, still glorifying it, Tony. But there are areas of the Labor Party in New South Wales that are seriously weird, and these reports that came from within the Labor Party that this person puts photographs and the names of her legion of enemies in the freezer. I can't improve on that. I mean, you only have to state it to realise what you're dealing with.
I don't want to make light of it, but you did once refer to a former Prime Minister as a lying rodent.
I never did, you know.
Did you at least keep his name in the refrigerator?
No. In fact, far from it. I had to have a photograph of him on the mantelpiece.
There you go, Charles Firth.
Yeah, I keep the name of my enemy in the freezer, but his name's Kelvinator. So, hey. Come on, I got some applause. No, but the rumour that I heard, because I've got links into the ALP, and the rumour I heard was that Belinda Neal keeps her enemies in the freezer. That's the name.
Joel Fitzgibbon, I'm sure that you can refute that at the very least.
Well, first of all, I'm wondering whether George is prepared to sign a stat dec on the lying rodent thing.
There'd be only ice cubes in your freezer, I'm sure.
Well, like Charles, I think, you know, possibly we should all be feeling grateful that the only thing in the freezer is the photographs.
And now an iguana.
But look, in politics we all have enemies, Tony. It's a reality. You only need about 50 plus 1% to survive. And I find the best way to keep them to account is to have a good memory.
An enemy is
Right.
in your own eyes. I mean,
Pru Goward.
most people don't take too much notice of anybody else anyway. So if you've got your enemy in the freezer, it tends to be because you think they're your enemy. And you'll be surprised very often to know they don't even know your name. So I think the whole idea of keeping people in the fridge